Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. From the time India was treated as a nuclear pariah following the nuclear explosions in the mid-1970s to further isolation after the second nuclear explosions in 1998, India as well as nuclear powers have come a long way. From being denied even basic technologies to a situation where the United States promised this week to India that it would provide key dual-use technologies, and India also about to get a membership in the MTCR, has meant major changes in the way India is perceived as a nuclear power. The United States also has come out openly in favor of India's entry into the nuclear suppliers group, which was echoed by both Switzerland and Mexico during the just concluded visit of Prime Minister Modi. India, incidentally, has been attempting to be part of this 48-nation group since 2008, where the entry is only through consensus. India's bid has been unsuccessful so far because of countries like China having reservations about India's entry. Now with the US and also countries like Australia, Switzerland and Mexico, which were earlier opposed, now coming around to supporting India's entry, will it be possible for India to enter NSG? How important is it for India to be part of the NSG, and also how important is it for other nuclear power countries to have India in it? We will discuss all this today with G. Balachandran, Consulting Fellow, Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, M.K. Bhadrakumar, former ambassador, Bharat Karnad, Research Professor, National Security Studies at the Centre for Policy Research, and Nandan Unnikrishnan, Vice President and Senior Fellow, Observer Research Foundation. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Balachandran, so where do we stand now as far as NSG is concerned?
Look, there's only one stumbling block, how it will respond. The others, you can have everybody else in favor, one person says no, you're out. So that is still a problematic question, but I suspect, given a number of other factors, the forthcoming plenary may not take the final decision, but it will definitely be a step forward than what has been happening so far in the earlier plenaries, because at that time there was no Indian application.
Now there is
a formal application.
This is the first application in
This is the first application. Yes. Earlier, US had only suggested, and so far there were no need to take a decision, but now they have to take a decision. So I think this plenary...
This is at the end of this month. I think
24th it finishes, 20th to 24th. They will, I think, make some sort of a consensus decision, but nothing will be announced at this time. But I think it will be definitely the wording will be such that the entry will be more or less assured.
Mr. Bhadrakumar, would you agree with that? Is that your sense also? Is that your sense also?
No, I prefer to be a little cautious on this score. I see that this would be a long haul in so far as this is not a question of someone blocking our path alone. Now, you know, when you have a certain number of votes required on your behalf, or when there is a consensus making involved, there is a question of canvassing. But here, the alchemy is different, as I understand it. Mr. Balachandran is a very, very big expert in India, one of our foremost experts on this subject. So it's difficult for me to differ from what he has said, but nonetheless, with humility, let me present this point of view, that the issue is also as to what NSG becomes with India's entry. Now, to use an ordinary simile from our ordinary normal life, you have a bowl of milk, and into that you put a spoon of yogurt. Something changes, fundamentally changes. So NSG was created with a certain sense of direction.
It was against India.
It was certainly precipitated by India's nuclear explosion in 1974. It was India-centric is beyond doubt. Between 1975 and today, the world has changed, India has changed, the people who created the NSG have changed, their outlook towards India has changed. All that taken into account, there is no need to really dig into the past. But the fact of the matter is that the NSG is about a certain thinking towards the proliferation question. Now that undergoes a change with India's admission. Now, after that, what does it become? Now, therefore, I'm not even certain whether, aside the pro forma expression of support for India's membership, whether even the United States has clarity as to how to take this forward. Now, therefore, I see this quite similar to the paradigm over India's membership of the United Nations Security Council, where no one is saying he's opposing India's. And in this case, curiously, even China doesn't say that it is opposing India's membership of the NSG. It is speaking about the norms to be applied and uniformly norms to be derived.
Now, that is where the problem lies, Mr. Karnad. What are these norms which China is talking about? Why is it so difficult for India to adhere to it?
No, look, I think what Beijing is saying is there's a procedural problem for India's admission, in the sense that all NSG members have had so far been signatories of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So that's what China says India should first sign. India should sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then its entry then becomes, it eases the entry.
Why should India not sign the NPT?
Well, the reason India cannot sign and will not sign an NPT, at least not in the foreseeable future, is because on principle. The principle is, one is political, the other is technical. There's a need perhaps for India to resume testing, to have credible thermonuclear weapons and other kinds of weapons. We have designs that we need to test. Physical validation of these weapons designs and so on would require us perhaps to test in the future. So if we sign the NPT, that door is closed to us. So even theoretically, to keep the door open, we expect and have so far been given an exception by the United States and other countries. Now, the political thing is something else.
This is the Indo-US nuclear treaty.
That's right.
Right.
Now, the problem with China is that it can also, it has the procedural problem that it has created, saying that India should first sign the NPT, which is perfectly reasonable for a position for China to take. But the more important thing is now political. When China sees India and the US, in a sense, ganging up against it in Asia, and this is very manifest now in our outlook and approach, China would be even more determined to prevent India's entry. No matter who else pushes India's case, it doesn't matter, because they are going to stand by principle of NSG members, all members requiring to sign the NPT. Then because India will not sign the NPT, India will not gain entry. Very simple.
This has nothing to do with Pakistan.
Well,
Because there is also a...
No, but that is a secondary thing.
Yes.
The secondary thing is the Islamabad-Beijing axis,
Right.
wherein the Chinese are saying their scheme is for hyphenation, India-Pakistan, while the rest of the countries, including the United States, is dehyphenating. So they are saying, well, if India gets in, so should Pakistan. So that's where the hyphenation aspect comes in, but that's secondary to Chinese concerns. The more important thing is that they do not want India in. They're determined not to have India in, but they are putting forward the procedural obstacle.
Which India will not be able to accept.
India says it will not accept it.
Okay. Nandan, how important is it for India to get into the NSG?
Well, in practical terms, the Indians are not yet on the export market for nuclear materials. So in that sense, we don't have much to lose. Also under the Indo-US nuclear deal, the NSG had given an exemption to India. So there is really no restriction on trade as such. So I don't think in practical sense there could be much loss. But I would think that in pure symbolic terms also, it is very important that India enter as a major emerging power, that it enters these bodies of global governance of restrictive regimes.
Okay. Mr. Balachandran?
Look, first of all...
Is that the only reason why India should get into the NSG?
Yeah, first of all, there is nothing to be gained from the point of view of India's nuclear program by becoming a member, because all that you require in nuclear technology, reactors or uranium, you are already allowed to get it. Two, NSG does not gain much by India's membership either, because India by very tradition and nature is not a proliferating country. So they are not worried that if India is not admitted, it will start proliferating. It's only a question of tying up all the loose ends. Since proliferation issues will be important in the coming years, and there is one institution or international organization which is very much involved in that. From that point of view, to tie up a loose end, it will be only, as to some extent Nandan says, both a symbolic and politically valuable for India to be a member of all the 4 export processes. But there's another one point you must understand. Like they say, what is goose is sauce is for the goose is sauce for the gander. China has been trying to become a member of the MTCR for the last 1 decade. They have not been able to do that. If India is admitted to MTCR before China, then China's admission to MTCR is 0. Because what it wants to do for India in NSG, India can do it for China in
MTCR.
Therefore, I think China will think twice before carrying to what extent. That is a political decision, so I cannot say what they will do. But they will have to trade off one against the other if they are serious about it.
That is what some people believe. This trade-off, Mr. Bhadrakumar, missile technology control regime, India is almost at its doorstep. Is the US has cleared it. Everybody, there doesn't seem to be any objection from anybody else. And China, since China is not part of the MTCR still, so India's entry there is almost assured. So would you agree with Mr. Balachandran's theory?
There is a certain difference involved here, in the sense that China has not behaved with a full sense of responsibility on missile technology transfers in the past. It has transferred freely to
North Korea,
countries, yes, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, so on. Then after that, when there's in the face of mounting criticism, China began exercising self-restraint. Now that China is not the China today. Today's China is a very big China. It's more than half a superpower. Therefore, China may want to get into the MTCR, but at the same time, the corollary is also that it will be in the interest of the international community, quote unquote, also to get China on board.
In the
and
MTCR.
that China observes these guidelines, and its conduct or behavior is guided by these universal norms derived by the MTCR regime. Now, that is in the interest also of the international community. So, even if India has become an MTCR, I do not think that it is realistic that if there is a requirement to get China on board, China is exercising self-restraint.
No, so you're saying that the trade-off may not happen.
Trade-off is an unrealistic thing. I think we are thinking too big about of ourselves to imagine that we can hold the chip for a trade-off. Because when it comes to China, you see, even in the case of NSG, we know precedents are there, like in the case of admission of France. So, the point is, at the high table of global politics, you tell me who it is that you are talking about, and then I will tell you what my position is. That is the reality of life in global politics. And China is not a thing to be trifled with. This we must understand that. And therefore, India cannot hope to resist on its own for a bilateral trade-off with China.
No, but what about the role of United States, Mr. Karnad, United States?
If I may interject
Yes,
here.
yes, please.
It's no question of bilateral with China. The proposal comes to MTCR. India is a member of MTCR. India says no. End of story. There's no bilateral between India and China on this issue. Unless MTCR changes its consensus rule, which I don't think they will do that. So there's no question of India-China bilateral.
No, but why is it that, how is it that India is gaining an entry into MTCR and China is still being stopped?
No,
Why?
China, as Ambassador said, China had a very bad record, still has,
Right.
on missile proliferation. They have been trying to get in. They made the first application in 2004. It has not been entertained, and it is not being entertained. So there's no question of bilateral between India and China on this matter at all. If it comes to MTCR, India says no, India is a member and says no, then it is no, end of story.
No, but
See,
okay.
I tell you, I must just qualify. I used, unfortunately, an imprecise expression. Bilaterally, when I said, I meant the spirit of it. That is, as a quid pro quo. That is what I meant by bilaterally. Otherwise, it is a wrong expression to have used.
Okay, sir, but what is the advantage of India getting into MTCR, which China will not have?
Well, I too am a bit skeptical as to what it is that we'll gain from the MTCR. Just as I am skeptical about a membership about NSG.
NSG.
Yeah, because look, in the NSG, we are supposed to have mastery over 3 fuel cycles. Now, sure, that there are some shortages or fall-offs in quality and so on with respect to safety aspects. But these are still supportive secondary aspects of the larger scheme, whether it's civilian use or military use. Missiles too, we are self-sufficient in the sense that our Agni series of missiles, for instance, are amongst the most advanced anywhere. In fact, the Agni 5, which is the prototype of all the missiles that we're going to have from here on, and even in case of retrofitments, the advancements there being retrofitted onto the other Agni 2, 3s and so on. You have an extremely accurate missile at long range. And that's because of the technological fixes we have over the years configured for the missile. So when one says, well, MTCR, what great benefits would India be endowed with membership in the MTCR? I don't see any, except I see it as a barrier. Now, sure, India has been so far responsible and we have acted responsibly and everybody applauds our restraint and so on and so forth. But if you have a country like China, which is a rogue nuclear proliferator, it is deliberate and in a very mindless sort of way, it keeps at disturbing the order and being disruptive. As a policy of state, that's the attitude, that we're going to upset the global order.
And we are going to get...
No, but that's the point. If we get into the MTCR, if we get into the NSG, we are bound by the constraints of the treaty regimes, because these are treaties, virtually. Now, if you are not, in theory, you can do the kinds of things to discomfit China that China has done to discomfit you. For instance, China has gone about very deliberately to discomfit India, undermine India's security by nuclear missile arming Pakistan. No question about it. Now, should we close off all possibilities of our using the same kind of tit for tat? But this is hard realpolitik. I'm sorry, there's no idealism involved.
Mr. Balachandran, it's important.
To some extent, I differ with Bharat on this point. We don't gain anything by member of MTCR because, on the other hand, MTCR, not so much as MTCR, the US laws require when a non-MTCR country transfers a missile to another non-MTCR countries, both the entities will be sanctioned. That's what happened. Now,
So to avoid those sanctions, we need to be there.
For instance, if we want to export BrahMos to Indonesia or Vietnam, if you do it today, then both ISRO and defense, they will be sanctioned and there will be a lot of effect on India's space program. But if India becomes an MTCR, the US law says expressly, if the transfer is from or to from an MTCR country to a non-MTCR country, neither will be sanctioned. Therefore, this opens up that's why today if Russia gives us Cosmos, there won't be any sanction on either India or Russia. Therefore, MTCR membership makes it possible for India to transfer missiles or technology, whatever MTCR controlled items, to a non-MTCR country without any fear of sanction from only one country which has a law which says you should be sanctioned, that's US. So
Okay.
that will be a gain.
Okay. Nandan, as far as US is concerned, why is US so anxious and eager to get India into the NSG, and what is the benefit that they are going to get?
Well, there has been a distinct warming of relationships, the relationship between US and India over the past decade. And obviously, the United States wants India to be aligned with India to be aligned with it. And this falls within that scheme of things. And India is trying to extract a particular price. But coming back to the issue of membership, I think the significant factor here is that India has been striving to get into what we consider bodies of rule making, bodies of global governance that set the rules. And NSG, MTCR, just as the UN Security Council, are some such bodies. And therefore, it is a matter of pride and a matter of what I would think completely justified demand from the Indian side to be part of these rule-making bodies.
Mr. Bhadrakumar, is that why we need to be into all these things? That we are an emerging power, and we have to be there on the table.
You see, it's not only symbolic, like I touch on what Mr. Balachandran said earlier. MTCR is very, very beneficial for us insofar as our transactions of this nature, whether it is to the United Arab Emirates or whether it is to Vietnam or to a Latin American country of BrahMos missile, for example, it is risk-free. We can go up front. There is nothing wrong in it. And the people who
But what about the point made by Bharat?
That is
that keeping our options open in future. If China is playing mischief, why can't we also give tit for tat?
I'll tell you.
You can give to Vietnam. Vietnam is the neighborhood of China. You give BrahMos to
it's
Vietnam.
not like that. It's not like that. The point is, India has never adopted the methods of an adversary. If you look at its diplomatic history, different countries have different practices, and you don't have to look very far. You have a neighbor just on the western border. But, our approaches don't have to be therefore on par with China. And we do have the intellectual resources to craft ingeniously our own methods to come on par, to neutralize the adverse fallouts of China's behavior in that sense, or in terms of optimally cultivating influence. There are other ways of constructively doing it also. And I think it is in India's DNA that India prefers that kind of a route. Therefore, if China is boorish about it and China is behaving irresponsibly, I don't think Indian thinking would be to follow on the same track and hit back. But I have to answer, you never give me an opportunity to tell about the why in this one. Now, you see, the history is that this is an idea, the NSG membership is an idea that was put into our head by the Americans. And the chronology is that at that time, the whole thing was put together as a package.
This was in 2008, following the nuclear deal.
Informally at that time, not formally, but on a parallel track, this was going on. Then it was in 2010 that Obama put this across. But you see here, the point is this, that
the same question which I'm asking, which I asked Nandan also. Why is US interested that India gets into the NSG? Because all other things. Now, without being a member of the NSG, without being an MTCR, we are getting we are supposed to get these nuclear power reactors from Westinghouse.
If you get into NSG, I think the pressure will continue to mount about NPT, about CTBT, and so on. There will be pressure on it. You can see that. That will be the negative part of it, because we will be standing out like this, and then there are others also looking outside from the outside the tent, looking in. Don't forget about Israel. how do you tackle these guys? So there is also that part of it. Bharat,
No,
yes.
but Ambassador, I think when you say about things like restraint as part of our DNA, it's almost as if then this becomes a constant forever. My point is, diplomacy, like everything else, is fluid and has to adjust to situations. Now, for 60 years, we may have been restrained, as you mentioned. But does that mean that we are forced or compelled by our past to remain so when we are disadvantaged repeatedly and consistently by adversaries who are far less scrupulous, like China? Again, this is the point that I keep making, that if you talk of DNA, it's almost as if you can't change
You're closing
anything.
your door.
You can't change anything. That's not
Let me
true.
say one thing.
Right now, again, for instance, just to change, the talk of BrahMos going to Vietnam has been there for about 15 years. Now, why is it that this government has come in and said, finally approved it? It's now going through. It's actually, in the next few months, the first shipment should be going to Hanoi. So that's the difference. So would you not say, Ambassador, that something has changed? It's up to the government of the day to decide what the policies are. There's no such thing as systemic, genetically, prefigured policies.
No.
No, see.
I agree with Bharat. There's nothing invariant. You can't say that. But precisely what he's saying. At this point, the sort of mischief you may want to do, that is, proliferate China's neighborhood with missiles. If you do that, because except for Korea and Japan and other countries, which none of the others are MTCR members. Indonesia is not, Vietnam is not, Malaysia is not. If you do it at this point of time, you will be affected. If you become an MTCR member, you can do mischief in the neighborhood of China, in the area of missile transfers, without any fear of retribution by anybody. That's the
Nandan,
thing.
Nandan, this discussion is getting very interesting. So this is the way to go around. And what happens to Indo-China relationship, which was being built up in a reasonably good way when things have started changing in the last few years.
It's a reflection of India's maturity, and I think it's a reflection that India's international stature is growing, that India can conduct its policy at multiple levels. I don't think our disagreements with China over nuclear regime or over the missile regime will necessarily have a humongous impact on our bilateral relationship. That will keep moving forward. But I would agree with some of the discussants who said that MTCR is of greater value in a sense, because it will allow us to export some of our products that we have. Whereas in terms of NSG, we are really not in the export market. But again, I emphasize, I think it is important for India to be a member of both these bodies, because at last it will mean that India is being accepted as part of the global governance.
Okay.
May I just interject
Very quickly.
and say that, the fact is that we have, as I said, we had mastery, we are supposed to have mastery over three fuel cycles: uranium, thorium, and plutonium. Now, the question is not that we don't have things to sell. It is that usually what happens is when you sell, say, natural fuel, uranium fuel reactors that we are supposed to be very good in, the supplier country also offers the financing, like the Exim Bank is doing vis-a-vis the Westinghouse AP1000 reactors. Now, we haven't had to date the kind of resources to finance these kinds of power plants. There have been customers out there lining up for our reactors had we had the money to finance it.
So what is the point? The
point to make is that we have always had technologies to sell. We didn't have the financial muscle to finance these projects in foreign countries.
So that's why
to make it attractive for foreign countries to buy them.
necessary to be part of the NSG?
No, not
No,
at all.
it's not.
Please.
It has nothing to do with
You
it.
don't have to
Without
be
it.
anything to do with the energy to
There's
sell.
nothing to do with
We
it.
don't have the money to.
No.
We don't have the resources to do it.
To finance our,
Okay.
setting up our technology.
I think on that note we need to end. Though I would have liked Mr. Bhadrakumar's last word as far as Indo-China relations are concerned. But I think that will be a separate discussion we will certainly have one of these days. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the big picture same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.